Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dynasty Gambit, part of the Going for Two Live network. The regular trio here completing the tier trio of episodes. We've done running backs, wide receivers for Dynasty, and now my co-hosts Devin and Brian and myself, Kyle, we're here to talk about quarterbacks and tight ends. Going to complete all of this. So how's everyone doing? Brian, how are you?
I'm excited as always to be here. Not sure what our tight ends look like, so I'm kind of interested in that. And quarterbacks are going to be full on for sure. A little bit longer part of it. So I'm excited and ready to do another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And Devin, how are you doing?
Doing good. Ready to dive in. Tight end is unapologetically my favorite position. It's always one I always try to get one of the top guys. I'm always trading for tight ends. I like to hoard them and hope they start going off. So this is probably my favorite position group out of all of them. So I'm excited.
It's funny because unapologetically, it's my least favorite position group. Probably for the same reason. I hate having it feel like I have to take a guy early. I like playing the draft boards, and yeah, I despise most tight ends. I'm also a Packers fan, so the history of good tight ends on the Packers don't match well. So most of my least favorite Packers players are tight ends. So yeah, I like quarterbacks more. I don't know where you stand on all this debate, Brian.
Well, the worst thing is you really can't.
Michael Finley, that's true. Yeah.
At least in redraft, it's hard to get both of them early. So it all boils down. And I know we're doing Dynasty. It's not that much different in Dynasty. It's kind of hard to do both. And then what really makes it interesting is you got the super flex a lot and sleeper drafts, but also you've got the tight end premium some too. So that gives a lot of quirks to things.
Yeah, that's true too. And I guess when we're talking about the tiers, for instance, I wouldn't imagine the tight end premium changes the tiers very much at all. I mean, I don't think you'd move players into one tier or another. Maybe within a tier, you might say, okay, the more like in a tight end premium, the tight ends who you feel are going to be more touchdown dependent to score their points, they won't get the boost. It's the guys you think will get more receptions. It's really, you're not really lowering anyone. It's just, okay, I think this guy will get more receptions than this guy, so maybe move him up ahead if you think there's a significant enough gap. That's maybe the only way you change, I think, for a tight end premium, unless either of you have a different process for that. But that's my thing. It's just, if I think there's a guy that's going to catch more passes, just boost him up a little bit in the overall rankings, not just the tight end rankings.
And one thing I'm looking forward to seeing how y'all value like Lamar Jackson and some of your more running backs versus my field. That's going to be kind of my point of excitement for sure.
Yeah, so I guess before we get to that, I got real quick for anyone who does want to tune in live and interact with us. You could watch the video on Twitter, but unfortunately we can't get your Twitter comments through the restream broadcast, whatever. Still some sort of algorithm error there. But if you do want to comment, interact with us, feel free to check out the Going for Two Live network on YouTube, on Twitch, or on Facebook. Although one thing with the Facebook, because of privacy laws, we can't see your name. So if you do want to, obviously we can still read the comments and still interact and answer all the questions. Just it'll just appear for us as Facebook user. But yeah, those formats all work for commenting. But of course, feel free to watch and listen on all your podcast networks if anyone's listening in syndication. I guess real quick, just quick plug on the goingfor2.com/store. So all our great Going for Two gear. Anyone watching the videos, sees my classic Going for Two hat, mostly because I hate my hair with it's not great hair like Devin has. Like
shit.
Well, and I also I mean I like my hair, but I hate my hair when I'm wearing headphones. So I always want to hide it with the hat. And I mean company man, so I'll keep plugging Going for Two.
There you go.
It's funny because we're talking quarterbacks, and that's the position everyone likes. And I've got the the Scott Fishbowl shirt from last year, and all that is available on Viridian Global. And I guess Viridian. We have global connection again with Brian. But Viridian Global is produces all our great Going for Two equipment. They've got all sorts of great gear from all sorts of great different fantasy content. So again, pushing the Going for Two stuff, but feel free to check stuff out. There's a few things on there that are for charity as well, so definitely encourage to purchase the shirts, even just to give back the money, even if you're not going to wear it. So definitely check all that out at Viridian Global. But just to say, quarterbacks are so popular, kind of like Led Zeppelin shirts, kind of styled in Led Zeppelin with all the symbols. I guess there's the Zeppelin 4, they each had their own symbol. I think they've got John Paul Jones' symbol on here, but Yeah, I think quarterbacks are like that, right? It's like every rock band that's been formed since 1970 has been influenced by Zeppelin in some form or another, and everyone still feels that way about quarterbacks, right? Everyone, football, you think quarterback right away. You think rock and roll, you think Zeppelin right away. So, but we're gonna keep, maybe we'll go to the Yardbirds first and talk tight ends before we get to Zeppelin. But yeah, tight end tiers. So yeah, I guess we'll turn the page on all those jokes. But I guess who wants to start with tight ends? I definitely don't, since I hate the position.
I'm going to let the man that's his favorite position.
Yeah, we
give his
should
spiel first. That way we can have a little bit to talk about.
Go ahead, Devin.
Well, I'll make it easy on my first tier. I only have one tight end in there, and that's Kyle Pitts. So if we're going to just go down by tier breaks right now, I don't know if you guys just want to list yours kind of like we did last week. If you guys have more than that in your first tier, but to me, he's the only tier 1 guy that I have in there.
Yeah, for me, it's so hard. I mean, out of the top 4, you could break it down to 1 tier. To me, I mean, like I said, 1 tier, 2 tiers, or possibly even 3. I've seen it all over the board. And I could definitely see the argument for Pitts. I think I'm going with 2 tiers. So my first tier, I'm going to throw in Andrews as well, just because he's younger than the other 2 well-known guys.
It's funny. I'm going to add one more and say my top tier is actually 3 deep. And I might even venture to say Kyle Pitts isn't my tight end 1 in Dynasty, although I get that's, I don't think I would draft any of the others ahead of him. I would just, okay, I'm not taking a tight end until Pitts is off the board. And I think that's going to be kind of my play in startups. And I mean, yeah, I'm a Kyle Pitts hater, maybe just because he stole my name, but Sen was a better last name than Pitts anyway. But yeah, there's my ego going. But I don't know. I guess with me, my tight end 1's actually Kittle. I don't know, like Brian, do you have Andrews ahead of Pitts in like, not talking tiers, but in the rankings?
No, I'm still on Pitts as the first. The only one I could see it possibly is in the standard league. In the sense, Pitts is going to have a lot more receptions and a lot more targets. But in Atlanta's offense for the next, until Ryan retires, it could be a possibility that he doesn't necessarily tight end 1 in terms of touchdowns. So it could be close in a non-PPR league.
Yeah, and again, I think that's the kind of, I think that's pretty consensus wide. I mean, to be honest, like even in non-tight end premium leagues, Kyle Pitts is probably going in the first round of most startups. Whether it's certainly one QB, I think there's a legit argument that he might go 101. Anyone who's sitting there in the early first probably isn't getting them without trading back, right? If you're just going to stick with your spots, you got an early first, you're probably thinking there's no way Pitts is going to be even at like 208 or 207. So you got to kind of, if you want him, you got to kind of take him there. But I still think George Kittle has this ability, and this is kind of why I was bumping up AJ Brown when we were talking about wide receivers 2 weeks ago. But this incredible yards after the catch ability that even if he's not getting the volume, he can produce so efficiently on any given week. And I know we think that's what Kyle Pitts will become, but I think we're also hoping that that's what he's going to be. And I mean, there's been hopes that Jonnu Smith becomes that, and Mike Gesicki, and I'm still just a little skeptical. Now, I will say that, yeah, the touchdown luck on 1,000-yard season with only 1 receiving touchdown is pretty awful. But I mean, like you were saying, Brian, like this is more of a Matt Ryan thing than anything, because we complained about it with Julio Jones for years. Oh, he's getting 1,800 yards and he's got 4 receiving touchdowns. What it gives there? Okay, that might be an exaggeration. I think the 1,800 season, he might have still only had 6, 7, 8 touchdowns. 1,800 receiving yards, you'd expect for sure double digits, maybe close to 15. So yeah, I think maybe I guess depends on how long you think Matt Ryan's going to be there. Might be the bank, but I even with the rookie quarterback in Trey Lance, I still think I want Kittle for that. He can just take any pass to the house at any given point. So I kind of still value that ability with him, because there really isn't any tight end that's going to get sizable volume that can do that. Again, unless Jonnu Smith suddenly gets all the volume, unless Gesicki does too. But I think, again, maybe Pitts eventually will be my tight end 1 in Dynasty, but I'm stubborn. Maybe that's all that this is.
So that's kind of how I was last year when he came out. Everyone was rejecting him and anointing him as the tight end 1 before he even played it down in the NFL. And so, I mean, I held off for as long as I could, but as you've already said, I mean, he's the second tight end ever in history to have 1,000 yards his rookie season, behind the great Mike Ditka. So, got to give him some respect. Only one touchdown. You got to think, even if that goes to 5 or 6, then, I mean, it jumps him up so high just because the tight end is such a closely grouped, knit together, where even 2 more touchdowns would have jumped him up probably 3 or 4 spots. So being 21 years old, putting up those kind of numbers, unheard of numbers in a rookie year. Most tight ends are lucky to break 500 yards in a rookie season. So, I mean, everything's there. And he left a lot on the field, too. He had some bad drops throughout the season. And, there's a little bit you could say, I guess, with Ridley, going out to where, he took over a greater target share than maybe he would have had if Ridley was still healthy or at least playing. But to me, I mean, he proved himself as the tight end one, being 21 years old and putting up those kind of numbers. It's kind of hard to argue with. I definitely get the argument with Kittle's my third. He's honestly my favorite player in the NFL. I love watching Kittle. I think that dude is awesome. Again, I just love tight ends in general, so I kind of gravitate to that anyway. But, I'll go ahead and give my top 3 since we're already talking. It's pretty much the same one. So I have Kyle Pitts in a tier of his own, and then I have Mark Andrews, first person of the next tier, and then George Kittle following him. My next tier is 4 deep. I have Kelsey and Waller in there as well, but that's how I'm ranking my top 5 at the moment.
Okay, so you mentioned, so Brian, it was you kind of said you split those top 4 into 2 tiers, right? So, and if you're saying I guess you kind of have Kittle and Kelsey in the same tier, then I suppose.
Yeah, I've got Kittle and Kelsey as my tier 2. And like we were talking about Pitts, the amazing thing, most of the other positions, there's not nearly the age bracket is. The age gap between, the top 4 or 5 players. I mean, like I said, Pitts is 21 and Andrews is 26. And then the others are 28 and 31 or 32. So it's just amazing that much of an age difference. So it's kind of hard to go away from Pitts. But yeah, my tier 2 is definitely Kittle and Kelsey. And out of those 2, when he's on the field, Kittle's my favorite. But Kelsey's just been more consistent over the last several years and didn't really show any signs of breaking down or anything last year to me. So.
He didn't finish as the tight end 1 overall, right? What a bad season, but still scored. I think it was in PPR leagues close to 13 points per week. Like, yeah, super consistent. And even if he wasn't the tight end 1 overall, he still kind of has that production. And it's just the age, right? Like, I think he'll be 33 during the 2022 season, if I'm not mistaken. Correct. And so but he also produces kind of like this crazy pace over the last 5 years has been like really like unlike anything else we've seen. So I have him in a tier by himself as the tight end 4 in Dynasty still. I wouldn't
interrupt, but you're spot on about Kittle, about Kelsey. He will be 32 when season starts. So.
Oh, I said 33, so I guess I'm not so spot on.
I think but I think he'll be 33 at some point in the season.
He'll be 33 at some point. We know that in history. Like he will get there. But
I traded him away 2 years ago, his 30-year-old season. So it was in the off season of the 2020 rookie draft class, and thought I was like, all right, I'm going to sell him for max value. It might be like a year early, but he's going to start declining, and he has proven me wrong on that. So it's been hard to replicate the production out of that, and kind of kicking myself over doing that. I was trying to get ahead of of the eventual little cliff there, but definitely didn't work out. So that's one of my biggest regrets in my dynasty fantasy football career is that I traded him away way too early.
I guess it all depends on the return, right? I mean, you could trade him away, but if you're happy with the players you got, then it wouldn't matter as much. So it just sounds like you weren't so happy with what you got back.
Yeah, I was running back needy at the time. And so I got Montgomery, and with my pick that I got in that draft class, I ended up getting Akers, and then I got another pick as well. So I didn't do terribly when you look at like the value of it, but still hurts when you see him. I thought for sure, I was like, okay, this is like maybe his last year of being elite, and that's 2 seasons later, he's still tight end 1 every year.
Although I got to think 2020, David Montgomery was what, the RB 5, 6, something like that?
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
So, I mean, as
it
much
worked
as
out.
It wasn't the tight end 1, but, still probably enough of a difference maker. So that's kind of the thing is at least, I'm sure people have sold Kelsey for much less and really come to it. So like, two guys that were younger, and you kind of, especially if you made it like a 3-for-1. I think those types of, deeper leagues, 14, 16 team, or even a 12 team, but start 12, 13. That's where you really want to make those. But still, as long as you can make something happen with the return, it doesn't. Because I can't remember what it was, but someone had mentioned that on a podcast I was listening to. Oh, they gave away this player, but didn't mention what they got in return, right? If the return is good enough, you don't mind losing out on the production, right? I think that's maybe something that, and if you have so few dynasty leagues, I get that. Like, you only have 1 or 2 leagues, and you got this player, trade away that, like, that's a magnitude thing. Like, that's the entirety of your portfolio. But for the most part, I kind of just feel kind of agnostic about it, right? If I just could always chase the best value, the guys I like are the guys I want because I think they'll score the most. Maybe that's me, and maybe it leads me to being stubborn about George Kittle.
And that's kind of what's hard to evaluate sometimes with the multiplayer deals, is how you actually rent one out or not. I mean, when you're one-on-one, yeah, it's pretty easy to evaluate. But multiple player deals, maybe one side had more players than the other. Oftentimes hard to judge. It's really each person's opinion.
And it also it forces the person you traded Kelsey with, Devin. They had to still fill those 2 other roster spots. If they made bad decision with those 2 other roster spots, it got suboptimal players that were roster cloggers, but that works against them. But it also, it frees up those 2 roster spots to make other moves, so it could work as the advantage. So there's also something that maybe is not to, we are going for 2. I think it does gets sponsored with the Dynasty Trade Calculator, but I think the one thing that maybe needs to just come into effect, and I believe they've got kind of a setting for it where when you're making multi-team trade, like a 2-for-1, or it's unbalanced, it will change the value a little bit. And in the right context, that makes sense. But the value of a roster spot, when you're making the 2-for-1, you're consolidating to get that, you're giving away the 2 to get 1, because to get that elite piece, you also open up that roster spot, and you can add that in the equation. What am I adding to that spot as well? So kind of a lot of things that kind of go into dynasty trades, but So Devin hinted at his tight end 5, and it's funny because I guess I struggle with, do I make another tier of just 1 here and have Darren Waller? I do have him as the tight end 5, and I kind of think he does separate in a sense of, I think he'll outproduce everyone in the next group, and he's a bit older than them as well. But I also think it almost would make sense to put him and Kelsey in the same tier, but I think there's still a production difference where there'll be enough of a gap. But really, I can't fault a dynasty manager for wanting to kind of, because I feel like Kelsey's probably going to be the 4th tight end off the board in most dynasty startups now. I don't think it's a hot take for us to kind of have him as the tight end 4. I guess actually unanimously. I'm the one that's skewing it off with how high I have Kittle, but essentially you guys have the same top 4 identically. So, you can bypass those others and still draft Kelsey if you want to build your team that way. It makes sense, especially if you're going with young, youthful running backs and wide receivers. You can maybe afford to have the older tight end, and you don't want all your aging players to age out at the same time, and then it's really catastrophic. If you can kind of fill one position at a time, okay, I can go older at tight end if I've got a good youthful base at other positions. So it is, I guess, Devin, the fun of the tight ends, right back to you, is you can play it multiple ways. Or you can take Kyle Pitts in the first round, or you can try and play the game with Mark Andrews and George Kittle, try and figure out where they're going to go, or just wait and draft Kelsey, or maybe even wait later and draft Waller. I remember seeing a startup draft. John McGlynn was hosting the commissioner evaluation podcast and invited me and Scott Sidlow on, and we talked. And in that draft, I think Waller went in the 6th or 7th round. Like, it was right at the end of the round too. Like, I believe he was the tight end. Might have been the tight end 8 or 9 off the board. So I think he's going to be quite a value there. So that would be technically my tier 3 is just Darren Waller on his own. So again, Devin, you mentioned Waller is your tight end 5 and to talk about that big tier. So we'll let you finish that in a sec. But Brian, what do you think? He might be frozen. So actually, this is a good time, Devin, to talk about that tier. Never mind. Bad transition by Kyle. Go ahead, Devin.
All right. So yeah, the reason I fully understand your argument on that for having Waller in a tier of his own. But when he is healthy, I know he was on pace for a crazy year last year. And, he had a 13 or 14 catch game, one of those games. And, I have him at that point just because I feel like right after Waller, when you get into the next batch of guys, it's a pretty big drop off. I mean, it's not huge, but Waller's a guy that, I mean, he competes every week with putting up Kittle, Kelsey numbers. So if you can get him, I think getting him in that 6th round, like you were just talking about, that is a perfect way to do your draft because he's the last one that's going to get you those absolute elite tight end numbers. Man, you're not having to pay the cost of a Pitts or anyone like that, and he's got a little bit more gas left in the tank than probably Kelsey does, being 2 or 3 years younger than him. But I think he's been a great asset. I was kind of held off on him for a while. One of my buddies in my Dynasty League was all about him when he got signed by the Raiders. And I was like, it's just some other guy. I was like, he's just a tall guy. I'm sure he's just, not going to be anything. And then he ends up being, who he is today. But yeah, I like him at that point just because, like I said, whether you break it down into a tier of his own, which I can agree with, or you keep him in the last position of the tier above, he's the last one of those top guys that's going to give you those crazy numbers that really is a matchup benefit to you every single week.
So I guess, Brian, I kind of talk about this tier 3 now. So we're talking about Darren Waller. So I guess the question is, A, is Darren Waller in your tier 3? And B, are there other tight ends in that tier with him?
I'm about to get kicked off tight end island. I get that. But in all honesty, I'd rather have I just as much have Hockenson as Waller because he's 25 versus Waller's 29. And last year they both averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game in PPR setup. So I'm okay with going Hockenson and Waller. I mean, if it came down to one, that last second you had to make a choice, I might still go Waller, but I'm not going to go away disappointed from the table if I got Hockenson.
Okay, so kind of opening up this tier, are there others in that tier? Or it's just those two.
No, that's it for me. There's not another, nobody else in the top groups there.
And that 12.3, just curious, that's a full point PPR?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, I'm actually a little surprised that's how high Hockenson finished. So, but I do know there was a couple of spike weeks, like I think 1 or 2 weeks where he was the tight end 1 overall. So, I think it was just maybe a lack of floor, really, like a high ceiling with Hockenson. But there were also some weeks where he wasn't, which is crazy. He's the clear alpha. He's going to get tons of targets every week. And it didn't quite always materialize and did get hurt. And, it was the same story for Waller. So maybe, you know what? I guess maybe I do, because I do, like, in my rankings, have Hockenson as the next tight end. I believe that would make it tight end 6. But
yeah, I've still got Waller ahead of him, but tight end 6 is definitely Hockenson.
But I guess to me, it's like that figuring out where that tier break is. Maybe you're kind of convincing me that it should be after Hockenson, not before. But
I'm okay with Waller and Hockenson. Like I said, there were weeks for Waller. I mean, of course, he had the injury too, but he had different times. But Hockenson had there's about a 6-game stretch here, right towards the middle or end of the season where he didn't do great. But early on, he had some really nice games. So if he had any kind of quarterback, and maybe he gets one other than Goff long term, and he's younger to begin with, you're going to should get more seasons from him. I'm okay with that.
Because I'm thinking right now, if where's this tier break? But I think it kind of goes all the way to tight end 10 for me. And I suppose it starts with a pair of was it Iowa or Iowa State teammates, whatever. But
Iowa.
Okay, so Hockenson at 6. I have Dawson Knox at 7, Dallas Goedert 8, Pat Freiermuth at 9, and then Noah Fant at 10. And I kind of feel like that's my tier 4. But maybe Hockenson does separate ahead of those guys. I guess I'm maybe not as excited about that offense as I am. Well, yeah. I guess the really offense I'm super excited about is the Bills, like, and depending on what the Broncos do with their quarterback. Of course, I guess depends on what the Steelers do with their quarterback too.
And one thing about Knox last year, he was so touchdown dependent that he's capable of a lot more catches, but he wasn't that hugely involved. Of course, now we don't know. I mean, even Gabriel Davis could be the wide receiver too, so it'll be interesting to see what the rest of the offense looks like, but behind Diggs this year. So maybe he gets more catches, but I don't know. That's just my opinion.
I have a feeling I'm going to be higher than consensus on both of them, Knox and Gabe Davis. Just I anticipate. I mean, they threw 655 pass attempts last year. They were 5th in the league, and 2 of the teams ahead of them had quarterbacks just retire, and Brady and Roethlisberger. So probably the Bucs and Steelers won't be that high, again, depending on what both teams do at quarterback, really. So I could see another year where the Bills are top 5, top 3 in pass attempts. And if there's that much to go around, I feel like those guys are going to get involved. Maybe they draft, bring in some free agents, but there's a chance that Sanders and Beasley are gone, and Davis and Knox are fighting against each other to be the second target on the team. And even the third target on that team could be pretty valuable in the right matchups. But Beasley showed a pretty consistent number 2 role when Diggs had his monster year. So you can definitely support two pass catchers every week. And then, maybe it's the number 2 changes week to week between them. It's a matchup exploitation thing. But I have a sense I'm going to want to have pieces of either when it comes to drafts. And so maybe that's I'd rather have Knox than some other guys, like not Hawkinson, but thinking Goddard, Freiermuth, and Fant. I have more questions about their offenses overall. So especially with tight end, I want to invest in the teams, like you said, Brian, touchdown dependency. But I feel like this is the touchdown dependent range. Like I don't think any of these guys aren't. And maybe that includes Hawkinson. Maybe I'm being a little unfair to Hawkinson with that, but I don't think any of them could have monster weeks, but could also disappear. So give me the guy with the most chance to be a monster offense.
Yeah.
So Devin, I guess you're tier 4 now.
This is actually still my tier 3.
Okay.
So it's 6 through 9 for me of my tier 3.
Nice.
And that's TJ Hawkinson, and then I got Dallas Goedert, Pat Freiermuth, and then Noah Fant. So I got Dawson Knox at 10. He's not in this tier, but I've been pretty high on him. I drafted him in all of my actual dynasty leagues, thinking I was pretty high on him coming out of Ole Miss just because he wasn't getting the opportunities there because he was teammates with Metcalf and AJ Brown. So it's kind of hard to get fed when you're on opposite side of the field of those guys. But I mean, I get why you have him up there. I think he definitely has the potential and the ceiling for it. If Beasley does end up leaving the team and they don't bring a different body in, then he probably does shoot up into my next tier. But as far as the other guys I just mentioned, Dallas Goedert, I've been a big truther of him his whole career. I was so happy that they finally pulled the trigger and got rid of Ertz. And then when they did, I mean, he picked up. I mean, he had some huge games. Even when Ertz was still there, he was having quite a few big games. And then especially when Minshew got in, that dude loved him some Goedert because he had some monster games during that little span, that little stretch. But he's still 27 years old. He's right there at that pretty much the age of where most tight ends kind of break out. So that gives me a lot of hope going into this season as well. They kind of have a lot of mouths to feed there. They're probably going to bring in another receiver if I had to guess. You got Devonta Smith there. So there's definitely competition for targets. But moving on past him, Pat Freiermuth. Yeah, if it wasn't for Pitts, we would be talking about how crazy of a rookie year Pat Freiermuth had. I mean, he had a huge year with Ben Roethlisberger, who could barely throw the ball, which I guess tight ends lend themselves to that as their safety blanket, quote unquote, for most quarterbacks. But I mean, he put up a monster year. He's 22 years old, 21 years old. I'm not exactly sure, but young enough to where, I mean, he's right there. He already had a great year. Does have some questions going forward at the quarterback position. So, but just age and what he's already done puts him up in that tier for me. I don't think there's much difference between Hawkinson, Goedert, and these guys. Like you said earlier, some weeks they're going to pop off, other weeks they're not. I think you could say that about almost every tight end left that we have to discuss that we haven't got to yet. But then I've always been a big Noah Fant guy as well. Another Iowa guy, drafted very high, just hasn't had a quarterback to throw to him. I think if he had an actual quarterback, he'd be putting up elite numbers. He's already shown a lot, I think, for being, 24, 25 years old. So that's kind of why I have all the 4 of those guys in that tier there together. They're all very similar. They're all about the same age. But yeah, that's my tier 3 there, those 4. We can't hear you.
Yep. No, that's on me.
There we go.
I will say, now that you can hear me, especially when they came out, I was definitely Fant over Hawkinson, even up until probably going into last year. I think after the 2020 season, going into the 2021, I think that's when I finally bit the bullet and, okay, raise Hawkinson. Maybe I've always been a Hawkinson hater, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe me going Fant as low as tight end 10 right now is also me thinking, believe so hard in him, and he's never really lived up to it. And it's a bigger disappointment than maybe the weeks where Goddard disappears, for instance, that I'm not as invested in.
Definitely. I mean, Fant's got all the talent in the world. He just needs a quarterback. But even if they do get a quarterback there, I mean, you got Sutton, you got Jerry Jeudy, you got the running backs. So I mean, there's a lot of mouths to feed to where even if they got, say they hit the grand slam and got Rodgers, is he going to put up that much better numbers than what he's been putting up? Just because there's literally so many other mouths to feed there. But don't worry, I don't actually believe he's going to get Rodgers. I know you're a Packers fan, so I'm not trying to say that. But yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I've been so high on the kid. I think he's been awesome, and I really want to see him do well. I actually traded for him in multiple leagues last year, where if I would have waited till this year, could have got him much cheaper because I think his overall dynasty value has taken a hit because everyone last year, I think, was still very high on him, expecting him to take that leap, put up those yards, and I just didn't do it.
So I think round out the top 12. Although I guess for myself, my next tier is probably just 3 deep, so it gets past tight end 12. But what do you guys think? Like, I guess this is we haven't really done your tier 4 yet, right? You mentioned Dawson Knox.
Yeah, I want to throw in a name real quick before we go on to the next tier, if that's okay.
Sure, Brian.
Sure.
One guy I've got different that hadn't been mentioned yet, and I'm really interested in seeing where he's going, is Dalton Schultz, because it's going to be interesting to see if he stays in Dallas and or moves elsewhere. I'm hearing he's likely to move elsewhere, and I'd throw him at the bottom of that tier we just mentioned.
Thinking that if he goes somewhere, a team pays him, they're going to give him targets, right? Like you're kind of earning the paycheck, earning the targets type thing.
One nice thing about him, I mean, I'm like odd now. I'd written an article about Jarwin kind of having a breakout year, and here somebody said, "What do you think about Schultz?" I said, "Well, this is going into last year. I thought he'd be okay, but not like he wound up. He wound up having a really good year." So, like I said, I kind of like him, but it kind of depends on where he goes. He'd almost be better off just staying in Dallas, but if you can get another high productive passing offense, he'd be in good shape.
Yeah, the volume. It's kind of Dalton Schultz, Dawson Knox, right? And I guess both kind of had similar breakout years last year. Do you like, in just talking about those two, do we draw parallels between what they did and what Logan Thomas, Robert Tonyan the year before, and how they were just not quite able to sustain that? Is that something I think based on where the draft price is going, I think everyone kind of expects that. But is it something, because those guys both got hurt, so it's really unfair to say that like what the production was. But even before he got injured, I don't think Tonyan was producing all that greatly.
No, I'm fine with Tonyan being a one-off. But in all honesty, Logan Thomas was still producing last year when he played. He scored over 10 fantasy points a game, he was at 10.2. There's actually only 6 other tight ends that have scored more than 10 points a game. So Logan Thomas didn't drop off. He just had injuries.
So I guess that's almost a good sign for a guy like Schultz then. If we're saying Knox was the touchdown dependent guy like Tonyan was, where he scored, I believe, 11, definitely got to the double digits, I think. And maybe Knox represents Tonyan, and whereas Schultz represents Logan Thomas. Touchdowns, yes, but also just the sheer volume from the offense gave him enough targets.
Well, that was the weirdest thing. So when Tonyan had those multiple over 10 touchdowns, he only had 6 or less targets. So, I mean, he was scoring on such an outrageous rate that was not sustainable. And also, you had to look into the fact that Aaron Rodgers had, what did he have the year before, 50?
I don't think he's ever got to 50, but I think he had over 40, though. I think it was might have been 42, 43, something like that.
It was rather high, yeah. And that was hard to sustain anyway.
Well, and I think about like the context of some of those touchdowns. Like one of those was a 3-touchdown game against Atlanta where Devontae Adams didn't play and Alan Lazard didn't play. So he was like, they were kind of, it was him and Marcus Valdes-Scantling. They was kind of, bare bones wide receiver core. And, they did enough to get a lead. They ran the ball heavy, but then it was good thing Tonyan got those 2-3 touchdowns in the first half because they had the big lead and they could just kind of run it out from there. And I believe the next week he scored another touchdown. So you had these, about almost, I think actually picking more than a third of his touchdowns came in this 2 or 3 game stretch where Devontae Adams wasn't there. And then I'm pretty sure that's his only 3 touchdown game of his career. So there was definitely context to Tonyan where I think it was pretty obvious he wasn't going to repeat exactly that. Now we didn't expect him to get hurt. I don't think he would have been completely awful, but it's also, I don't like for Tunyon, for instance, he's entering free agency now. So who even knows if he's on the Packers, let alone who the quarterback on the Packers is going to be. Although I will actually probably get an answer for that sooner than we know about Tunyon, to be fair. So once we find out that, do they re-sign him? I suppose coming off the injury, teams may not be looking to pay him that much. So maybe it's cheap enough that he does return. I suppose that's probably the best thing for him. I mean, unless he's going to join the Chiefs, but even then, if you're joining the Chiefs, you're behind Kelsey as a tight end. So you're not going to get a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers. So I believe that would be the best place for Tunyon, but clearly we're not going to talk about him in the top tiers here. I don't even think he's like, I don't have him in my top 24 even, but
I don't have him ranked at all.
Now,
I'm a Packer. I have to have him ranked, but yeah.
One thing I will say is this: Logan Thomas right now, average draft position for a tight end is 27. If you can get something like that for a contender, and you can get something like that for cheap, which you should be able to based on that number, I still think Thomas can produce, but I'm not that confident in Tyne. He was kind of a one-off and late in career, and really hadn't done anything prior to that anyway. So Thomas had neither, of course, but still.
Well, and it's crazy that Thomas kind of has produced without a quarterback, so you could buy into that more. Where, I mean, and the year like 2020, it was absolutely dreadful. Like I wonder, like you're saying, Brian, he scored 10 points per game with Taylor Heineke last year. Like that would be almost like if he had Heineke again, like after Heineke going with like 3 years of experience, that's probably the best quarterback situation he would still have. Obviously, we're kind of hoping and I think expecting Washington will address that further and really improve it. But man, that year where he was the tight end 3 or 4 in 2020, he had Dwayne Haskins, Kyle Allen, and great quarterback at one point, but Alex Smith coming off the leg injury. Which I think was clearly the best quarterback play he got that year. And it was still not really good. All due respect to Alex Smith, it wasn't great. But again, maybe this is something, Devin, you mentioned earlier with Freiermuth, right? The older quarterback, not as strong, and not this case, not so much the strong arm, but like, having the leg reconstruction, you don't have as much power throwing. Mm-hmm. That kind of feeds into a tight end. But I also, again, I want more touchdowns. So give me the better quarterback that can sustain better offense. So I do like that for Thomas. And that's a good point, Brian. And I think I guess we can keep talking about tiers. We were supposed to go quick on tight ends, so we could talk about quarterback a lot. But I guess the one thing I guess kind of want to end with is the overall strategy. Now that we've talked about these tiers, Devin, you said it right from the start. Go early and get one of those top guys. I think is the viable strategy, and that's why I struggle with the Hawkinson tier, right? Do I really want to draft Hawkinson is my problem. Right. Because as much as I do have that tier of Hawkinson, Knox, Goddard, Fant, and Freiermuth, I don't really want to reach for any of them in the single digit rounds. Like I want to get the tight end that falls to be in the, I would say even 12th round last year was sometimes too early. Cause I think about leagues where, okay, I drafted Tyler Higbee, but then just picked up Dalton Schultz off the waiver wire ananyway. I could have drafted a better player instead of Tyler Higbee. So
yeah, I mean, honestly, once you get to that tier, those kind of tight ends, so in my tier 4, like Knox, Gesicki, Hunter Henry, Schultz, Irv Smith, Cole Kmet, it's a huge tier because these type of guys just grow on trees. So, I mean, if you're looking for a production, any random week, one of these guys could pop off, or they're probably not going to get you much, maybe 2-3 catches at the most. You can get – when we were talking about Schultz, he reminds me so much of Austin Hooper, where he had this big year, got paid, and then went right back to 3-4 catch guy, not really putting up elite numbers, where I don't think Schultz is really ever going to get to that next level. I don't think he's going to put up the Gilder, Hawkinson, Freiermuth numbers no matter where he goes. So once you get past that tier, I think it's always the best strategy to just be like, punt the position, get someone that has some upside, and then most likely you can find some serviceable people either for low-end trades or even waiver wire, like you said, because no one really saw Dalton Schultz coming out and doing what he did this year. So I think those guys, like I said, they just kind of grow on trees. It's pretty easy to find a talent level of that type.
To Brian's credit, just go after Logan Thomas. Just wait as long as draft Logan Thomas. I don't know where he's going in startups, but like you're saying, Brian, if he's going as the tight end 27, that's probably 12th, 13th, 14th round. I love that range for tight ends. That's exactly where I want to draft the tight end. And unlike running backs and wide receivers, where if you're gonna go in on the position really heavy. You want to make sure you have youth. I don't have those same reservations about tight ends that talk about how they play longer. They also take so much longer to develop that the young guys, you don't really know who's going to be the productive guys. I'd rather just go after the guys I've known who've produced. Because they're so much older, they're usually so cheap that you could just acquire them. I've been after Jared Cook 3-4 years in a row now, and it's just good. It's if you're gonna strengthen all your other positions, he's good enough as your starting tight end. I know I had a Jared Cook team that went to the finals because it was an auction league, and I went as minimum $1 bid on Jared Cook because I wanted to maximize getting Patrick Mahomes and a crazy stacked running back core of McCaffrey, Cook, and Mixon, and Cooper Kupp for ridiculously stupid cheap, but that's kind of its own issue. But it all was possible because just spent as minimal as possible on the tight end, so you can go everywhere else. Now that's obviously easier to do in an auction league where you can control it, but the same thing applies in a snake draft if you're starting in a startup. So I guess Logan Thomas is a good name to end with there, Brian, as a good tail one, because I do agree with the production value there for sure.
I have one last name I'll throw out till we get to quarterbacks. I'm hearing Mike Gesicki could go possibly to the Chargers. I do not know at this point in time. If you're doing early startups, I wouldn't mind it if I got him just now. I mean, his value would change between now and later drafts, but still.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams that he could go to as a free agent that rises his stock, I would say, from leaving Miami.
Well, and I don't even think it's that awful if he stays in Miami.
No, I don't think it's bad, but I think it could be more like he was saying. Like if he goes to the Chargers, obviously it jumps him up probably an entire tier. But there's still a couple other teams where, the Bengals could use a tight end. A couple other teams where I'm not sure how big of players they're going to be in free agency, but there's probably 5 or 6 tight end needy teams with decent quarterbacks that if he goes there, it's definitely worth the swing of the bat and seeing if you can hit a home run and drafting him.
All right, well, swing of the bat. We'll stay away from baseball. We're locking out baseball on the show, and not just on the show. We want to stick to the good sport, football. It's all about quarterbacks in football, right? No one cares about the I do, but the John Paul Jones, John Bonham part of the Zeppelin. Everyone wants the flashy lead singer Robert Plant or the guitarist Jimmy Page. That's what quarterbacks are, right? So yeah, let's get into it. Top quarterback tiers. So we started Devin at tight end. Obviously, he doesn't like quarterbacks as much. So, and I like everything more than tight ends. I'd rather have kickers. No, maybe not that. We're going for 2. I don't think I'm allowed to say that. We have to go for 2 at a time. But Brian, what's your top tier at quarterback?
God, it's hard. So to me, there's only 3 quarterbacks that I would consider tier 1/tier 1A. To me, you go Mahomes, Allen. Personally, Herbert is those are my top 3 quarterbacks. It doesn't matter to me if you go tier 2 or tier 1 with Herbert, but that's just I would go tier 1.
We have the exact same tier broken down at the exact same positions as well. So me and you are the exact same on our first tier 1.
And it's a unanimous trio. Actually, so
quarterbacks.
Wow.
I think that's the top 3. And let's just focus on what that top 3 represents, right? And I think in a single quarterback league, that's I think where it's actually more interesting, because where do you take those guys? How early are you willing to take one of those 3 in a single quarterback?
What format are we looking at? We'll do both, but I want to start with 1 QB. Oh God!
Not that a lot of people play Dynasty with 1 QB. I admit, but if that, I just want to get that mental exercise going because it's tricky, right?
It's very tricky. In a very competitive 12-team league that I'm in, actually the top 3 quarterbacks were gone by the end of round 2. So I hate to pick them in the top 6, but I could see end of round 1, beginning of round 2 for whomever you like best.
You want to get your absolute guy 1, okay?
If it was my personal, if I'm drafting a startup, I'm probably looking in the 5th round, 6th round to get one of those guys. I don't know if I really want to pay more than that, because I think you're passing on some pretty elite receivers, some pretty good running backs at that point too. So for a 1 quarterback, I'm probably somewhere in between 4 and 6, depending on what end of the draft I'm on.
I think I'd rather get a tight end. I think if I'm going to reach early on one of those onesie positions, I think I'd rather get the elite tight end, thinking I can more easily replace it. So I think I'm closer to where you are, Devin, where, I might if it's the fourth round, I'm not really sold on any of the players there. Like the elite tight ends are gone. I could see myself going Josh Allen, but I find it tougher to think any earlier than like the end of the fourth, for instance, for me.
Yeah.
Because I kind of want to touch on that next tier. And Brian, the way you said it, tier 1 or tier 1A. And I've heard, Scott Connor from Dynasty and Chill, he kind of broke it down as the top 7 QBs. It really is one giant tier, but there's clear also breaks within that tier. But it's one tier because of how much more elevated that top 7. And we'll get into if both you agree with that, it's a top 7. But so far, we're all in agreement that the top tier or the tier 1A is 3 quarterbacks. And it's the same 3: Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. And I feel like a lot of times you'll see Allen and Mahomes go as the QB as the okay. Well, and we'll talk super flex, but my kind of super flex mentality, if you quarterback scarcity, that's what I want right off the bat. So I'm taking any of those. Like if it's 12 copies of Kyle drafted, it's those 3 are going to be the first 3 picks guaranteed. Do you guys have the same super flex mentality for that top?
Oh, agree. Every super flex that I've done, I've had both of my quarterbacks selected within the first 3 rounds. So I'm always hammering that. Depending on who's there in the second, you might got to pick the value where you can, but otherwise it's either quarterback, or whatever. But usually, I'm always going the first 3 picks, like you said. That would be my first 3 picks too. If you had 3 carbon copies of me drafting in a row as well.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And on that one quarterback, I agree with y'all on the 4th. Except I think realistically, the guys won't be available in the 4th round. So I'm going more from a perspective. If I'm okay to miss out on them, I think other than that, they're not going to be around even early 4th.
No, that's true, and it's almost maybe what I almost think that's kind of what you're saying, Devin. Right? You have it so low that you're not even going to worry about it, right? Like you really are targeting that next tier, and that's the range where that next tier is probably going to go.
Yeah, these guys in the next tier for me are going to be giving you similar production. Obviously, they're not going to put up some of the elite numbers, but as close as you can get, they're probably going to still give you some really good games every week.
All right, well, let's get to that second tier. So go ahead, Devin. What do you have in tier 2?
All right, so I got Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, and that is it for my next tier.
I have the exact same tier. This is really easy. So, but part of me almost thinks, could this be even considered one giant tier of 7, right? It's 1A, 1B.
Right.
Brian, is it a 1A, 1B or 1A, 1B, 1C scenario? Like how do you divide this next tier?
I'll be honest, guys. It's hard for me. I don't dislike Lamar Jackson, but I'm just more of a pure passer and he was hurt all last year and all that. So I drop him down a little bit. So my next tier is actually Murray. Who else? Burrow. And I'm okay with Prescott at the very bottom of that and Jackson in the next one.
And is Jackson alone in that next tier real quick?
Let's see. He should be. Yeah. And looking at the way I broke it down, he should have been in the tier by himself.
Okay. So we all agree clear top 7 in Dynasty for quarterbacks. And I would even argue it's probably the same top 7 in redraft. I mean, maybe you throw Aaron Rodgers in, I guess depends on, well, it probably doesn't depend on where he lands. As long as he's playing, you probably could throw Aaron Rodgers in there. But I think these are the 6 that I kind of want, or these are 7 that I really want. Last year was 6. Burrow kind of forced his way into that tier, I think.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's in a super flex draft. Like I'll take all of them in the first round. Like that's probably going to be my first round pick in a super flex startup is to get one of those 7. If it's a single quarterback league, the reason I would target to the 4th to maybe 7th round is to get one of those 7. Like I kind of don't want to dip below this tier at quarterback, whether it's super flex or single QB. I want at least one of these guys on every team I have.
I do want to throw one word of caution out there about Burrow. He's a second-year player, but don't forget he's actually already 25. He's either already 25 or will be at season start because most of the time you think about, well, he's got 2 years of pro experience. He's probably 23 or whatever, but he stayed in college forever. So,
yeah, a lot of with the quarterbacks, that's probably the only position group I really don't worry about age too much on, just because nowadays they're playing till they're 40, 45 years old, the elite ones at least. But there is, I mean, I definitely I get why you're saying it. It's funny to me. I've been laughing in the background because here you are in a Steelers jersey, and the two people that you said you don't like so far are Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, who are in your division. So.
I like Burrow. I mean, you have to respect Burrow at this point in time. But Lamar Jackson, to me, the two quarterbacks that I don't really love, and they're almost identical to me. Not quite, but Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts have similar attributes, and they're also a top eight quarterback. So I don't think it's a division rival, but I definitely see your perspective on that. It's easy to see.
Yeah, it's just funny. I agree on the Lamar Jackson part. Even when people had him as the QB1, QB2 2 years ago after his MVP year, I just could never get there just because, I mean, we've seen so many of these running quarterbacks flame out very early. And, he's not one that I would say really protects himself, like when he's running and getting out of bounds or anything like that. So he kind of opens himself up for injury, and he's not that great of a passer. I mean, he puts up elite fantasy numbers. So when you're just talking fantasy, he's up there. But I totally agree that I think he's a little overrated as a quarterback. I know he takes offense to that every time. It's, people compare him to a running back and all that other good stuff. But even were you guys, just out of curiosity, were you that high on him after his MVP year? Like, did you guys have him up in that tier? I'm assuming you didn't, just because you already said you're not high on him. But
yeah. So MVP season would have been 2019, or was it 2020?
Yeah, I think it was 2020 because it was 2 years ago, right? I think.
No, 2020. Rodgers just won back-to-back MVP. So
Yep,
so 2019. Yeah, because I remember going into that, I did have him in the top 12 going into that season, and that was like even having him at like QB 10, 11 was a lot earlier than most people. So I ended up having a lot of Dak and Lamar. I remember those were the two guys that were kind of at the end of, like, I had him at the end of the 10, 11, but most people seem like they had them closer to like 15. So I ended up getting a lot of them that year, and I guess as a result, I didn't necessarily go in and invest much more into Jackson because I felt, okay, now at this point, I've invested at the price I want to invest at, where it's a lot cheaper than it's ever going to be. So I haven't really invested much in him since, but I feel like there's a prevailing thought that, he's not considered top. I mean, none of us had him in our top tier, right? So I think he's someone I actually kind of am excited to go after this offseason, because I think the perception is every year it's going to be, like you're saying, Brian, the lack of confidence in his passing game. The touchdown rates have been pretty great, though, I got to say. Like, Matt Ryan wishes he had a touchdown percentage even close to what Lamar Jackson did. So does Kyle Pitts, to be honest. He wishes Matt Ryan could throw those touchdowns. But to mention Pitts, I did want to circle back. And you could chime in too, Brian, but I really want to ask Devin this, to put him on the spot with his tight end love. So we've talked about that top three, right?
Yeah.
Mahomes, Allen, and Herbert. And then you get to the next four. Where does Kyle Pitts fall for you in a startup, in a super flex startup, but let's say without tight end premium? Is he going completely after all those seven, or somewhere in the middle of the two tiers?
I would say in the middle of those two tiers. I see him probably late first round, early second. Not saying that I would pay for that, but I think that's the price of where he's probably going to go if you were doing a startup. So anywhere from 110 to 205, somewhere in there, probably. I think he's probably going to go.
And is that kind of where that second tier quarterbacks is also for you?
Yeah, I think starting off with Kyla Murray is still right around there. I think, after those top three, you're going to have guys like Jefferson, Chase, people like that. So I think Murray, Burrow, all those guys are going to start going maybe in a super flex 108, 109. There's going to be that tier of elite wide receivers, even maybe Jonathan Taylor, that go right in between there. And then you're going to start getting those last four quarterbacks to be the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. So I would say, for me, all seven of those guys would have to be gone before I took Pitts and a super flex. But I don't know if that's the case for everybody, where I think he could maybe go in between some of those guys.
Well, and like you're saying, end of the first round, if it's non-tight end premium, that's probably where Pitts is going. I get the sense most of these quarterbacks are going to be first round picks. You might, Dak's, I think, the oldest one, so he might fall to the second, and maybe Brian, your thought of like the fading Jackson. Maybe there's leagues where that's a prevailing thought, and Jackson falls out of the first round. But I would imagine at least half the first round is going to be quarterbacks of the Superflex startup.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If it's a 12 team, it's probably these 7.
Yeah.
Or in the first round. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Brian, you kind of with us on Pitts there is he should be after the quarterbacks.
Yeah, in terms of taking Pitts after the quarterbacks, is that what we're asking?
Yeah, I guess actually the question for you would be, would you take Pitts over Lamar Jackson? I suppose that's where we'll start.
I would take Pitts over Lamar Jackson. But the interesting thing to me, I hate to throw out websites, but I usually look at Fantasy Pros because they're kind of an overall accomplishment of everybody, and they have him as a quarterback 3, Lamar Jackson. I cannot buy into that at all for Dynasty. But so yeah, I would take Pitts because in terms of top tier, so few players being in each position in terms of what we consider super elite. I'd go Pitts.
And then
plus he's younger too. I mean, he's 21 and Jackson's 25 at least.
Yeah, something like that.
This is the final year of his rookie contract, I believe. Or no way, actually this is the 5th year option.
Yeah, 5th year option.
Yeah, he was the Baker year. That's right. Okay. So now, would you take him over any other quarterbacks? I guess for you, the next guy up, QB6 would have been Dak, if I'm not mistaken.
Would have picked him over Dak? Yes. Dak last year had some inconsistent games.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We'll keep going up. I guess Burrow was next for you at QB5.
Yeah, I'm still going up for Pitts over Burrow. I don't know. Burrow looks so good in the playoffs, but is that elite level totally sustainable? I'm not sure.
All right, Kyla Murray now. I guess is this really a tier separation here after or before Kyler?
I'm going as long as Kyler's still back with the Cardinals, which I think he personally will be. I'll take Kyler over Pitts, but it's awfully close.
Okay, my thing, I don't really care where Kyler Murray plays. As long as he's on the NFL field producing the way he is, I don't care what team he's with. And I think he might get a better coach. I think that the odds of that are actually probably in his favor. So I don't care if he stays with the Cardinals personally.
I don't either, as long as he doesn't sit out.
Yeah, I guess that's the risk. Yeah, I mean, I doubt he does.
I mean, let's be honest about the Cardinals. They didn't really even have a wide receiver 1, and that's one thing everybody thinks about D-Hop, but he wasn't even the leading receiver in yardage and touchdowns when he got hurt in Week 10. I was kind of shocked that Christian Kirk was.
Yeah, and I think AJ Green might have had more touchdowns, right? Like, I don't think Kirk had that many touchdowns. I think he definitely had the receiving yardage and was actually pretty consistent.
Kirk only had 4 at the time, but D-Hop didn't even have that many.
Oh, really? Okay, so it was okay because I know AJ Green was kind of used as their red zone weapon, but yeah. Okay, so Murray Pitts that's kind of the line you're drawing there.
Yeah, and like I said, it might if that's a startup, yes, but if I had an existing team, it would all boil down to a coin flip and a position need. So
yeah, making the trade, of course, yeah. I want to throw a scoring wrench here, Devin's. Like, how high would it have to be for him to jump that second tier and get to maybe the 104? Like how high of a premium would it have to be? Like a tight end premium for receptions extra over other positions?
Man,
because I'll be honest, I think going from 1 PPR to 1.5, just adding the extra half, I don't think that's enough. I think when you get to 1.75, that maybe starts to be it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely, I would have Kyler over him, even if it was a point or point and a half. Man, that's tough. Even Burrow, I probably still take Burrow, but then right there, probably in between I have Joe Burrow, then I have Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott. So probably in between Burrow and Jackson, if it's even 1.5, that's probably where I'm taking Pitts.
See, I think for him to jump over any of those quarterbacks, and again, I'm probably not taking him in the first round anyway. I think I would if it starts to get to the double, like 2 PPR as opposed to 1. But I think especially when you have to start 2 tight ends, I think that's where if you have to start 2 and there is a tight end premium, I think Pitts has an argument to be the 101.
For sure.
I still don't think I'd do it though, just because I'm that much of a hater. But I'd probably go 104. I think I'd take him ahead of the. You see, I actually have Lamar as my QB4, so I'm apparently the highest on Lamar here. You'd be the next guy for me, but if it's if I've got to start 2 tight ends and there's just as much scarcity, in fact, probably more scarcity because there's really only 5 guys worth having. I'll go Pitts ahead of Lamar, but I still think I'd rather have Mahomes and Allen certainly and Justin Herbert.
Yeah, you got to weigh that with would I rather have Herbert, Murray, Jackson, and Fant or someone like that? You know what I mean? Or am I gonna have to have Pitts and then I'm gonna have Matthew Stafford as my quarterback? You know what I mean? It's a hard line to walk there, but I would probably lean quarterback too. I mean, I love the tight end position. I love tight ends, but quarterbacks, man, it's if you don't have them, that is the hardest thing to get, especially in a super flex league. Like, you're gonna have to pay for them. You can get a serviceable tight end, but get a serviceable quarterback that you believe in that gets you a lot of points every week. If you don't have one, someone's going to make you pay for it, even if they do trade him. So I'm probably still going quarterback, even as I lust over my tight ends.
I was thinking about a really off the wall question earlier this evening in terms of like Jackson and Hurts. Do you value that type of quarterback as much in a 4-point passing league as a 6-point?
Well, I think the thing with Lamar is I think Lamar isn't really hurt by going to 6 points. I think Jalen Hurts definitely is. He's someone where I have like Hurts starting my next tier as my QB8 right now, but with conventional scoring of 4 points per passing touchdown, -2 per interception, no points per completion or anything like that, or negative points per incompletions. None of that scoring. Those type scoring is where I maybe Hurts. But the thing with Lamar is, it's not, he still throws enough touchdowns. I talked about the passing touchdown rate's actually up there with him. With Lamar, it's just the yards, right? So as long as the rushing yards are worth more than passing yards, I don't nerf Lamar too much in that setting personally.
He did have that one massive year in terms of touchdown passes, but that's really his only one, right?
Yeah, it was, and that was never. I don't think anyone expected him to sustain it. I think it was over 9% touchdown rate. But even if he can keep it close to, like, even if Tom Brady's career average, I believe, is like just under 5, and Lamar is I think only 1 year has been below that, and I think it was his rookie year. So as long as he can keep like a 5 to 6% touchdown rate, I think he'll be able to sustain it again with his massive amounts of rushing yards. Because I think it's the. Maybe a almost Josh Allen might get hurt there, where you might not take him 101 because of all the rushing touchdowns. They don't accrue as much value as the passing ones. I think so. And a guy like Hurts, right? He scored so many rushing touchdowns that he would be hurt. Maybe you dock Kyla Murray, but I think it's even Murray. He produces enough rushing yards, so I wouldn't lower Kyla Murray too much either in that format.
No, I would lower Murray less than Jackson personally, but that's just me.
But yeah, I think Jalen Hurts is the one that's hurt the most in that format, pun intended, we'll say. But yeah, I guess I can kick off my tier 3, which is rather deep. This kind of takes us all the way to the QB2 range technically. I've got 6 guys here in tier 3. So Jalen Hurts, Russell Wilson, Desean Watson, and he's so hard to rank. Is he a tier of his own either before or after this tier, right? Like that question kind of asks himself, but I think in this tier makes sense. And then the 3 rookies from last season, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Trevor Lawrence. So that's essentially my top 12 plus 1. So one of those guys is going to fall out of the top 12. I think if I look at my rankings right now, it's Watson I have at 13, but I could get behind the argument where he needs to be higher, and Lawrence is the guy that falls out of the top 12. But that's my tier 3 for me. So it's actually... and I guess the one thing that, again, credence to what you were saying, Brian, I think that the separation between quarterback 7 and 8 for me is much larger than where it is anywhere else. So it almost does feel like, is it one massive tier from 1 to 7, and then this is actually tier 2 for me? So that's, again, how much I want one of those top 7 quarterbacks. It speaks volumes. I want quarterbacks in this range as my QB2 in Superflex, but I don't really want I don't want Hurts or Wilson as my QB1. Devin, do you want to share your tier 3?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I have one name more than you and one name that I took out, but I actually do have, of my 8th quarterback, I have Desean Watson in a tier of his own. I know you had said you could make the case for it. The reason I put him that was just because if he's playing, if he's healthy, all this other stuff is not going on around him. He's definitely above Hurts, Russell Wilson, Trey Lance, all those type of guys to me. So I have him in that next in a tier by himself. And then I have Jalen Hurts, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Trey Lance, and Justin Fields as my next tier break. So there's a tier break of 5 there. If you include Watson, it's 6.
So did you say Russell Wilson?
I did.
Okay, you did say Wilson. Sorry, I was kind of trying to.
Yep. The one I didn't have in there that you had was Trevor Lawrence, but he's at the very beginning of my next tier. But with a little bit of the rushing upside, and I'm a Bears homer, so I have Fields above him.
But do you have Rodgers ahead of Fields still in your rankings?
I do. I have
I definitely Watson, don't, which that's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, if he plays, say, the same amount that Tom Brady does, that's 4 more years. Yeah. I don't think he's going to play that long, but until I hear that he's not re-signing or whatever, I'm going to keep him there. So he could just as easily fall out in the next 3 weeks of even being ranked at all. So, but for now, if he's in there, I mean, he just won MVP again. It's so hard to not have him in there.
Because so technically, your tier 3s for both of you, Devin and Brian, are one quarterback. And Devin, for you, it's Desean Watson. Brian, you mentioned Lamar Jackson. So, Brian, what's your tier 4?
Well, I agree with y'all. Well, with Devin, Watson. I mean, God, he's a risk and a gamble, but he's above everybody else. If you want to take the chance, if you've got the nerve to do so, he's by far the better quarterback of any of those. And long term, short term, as long as he actually plays, he's a tier above everybody else. And then after that, my names are very similar. I went with pretty much all the rookies. Fields, Lawrence, Lance. I like all those. Then along with that, I couldn't go with Hurts. So did I have anybody?
I had a feeling the way you were kind of hating on Lamar Jackson and the comparisons. I had a feeling Hurts might be a little lower for you.
That's my next tier. And real quick, I'll just go ahead and throw out similar names that y'all had. The Wilsons of the world: Russell Wilson, Stafford, Aaron Rodgers. That's where I would pretty much end off, and I wouldn't. After that, it would be hard for me to really like any other quarterback. So,
yeah, I feel like outside of maybe Russell Wilson, it's a really young group there. That tier we've been talking about. Again, my next tier though, it's a bit older. It's the 30-year-old quarterbacks that are still doing it. Stafford, Rodgers, Cousins. I kind of have that as the next tier after the Watson Lawrence range. So that kind of gets me into the. I guess I have Cousins at QB 16. So that's kind of where that range ends there.
I have Carr in there with those guys too.
I like Carr too, but it's basically a top 16/17. And then you have quarterbacks that you really don't want, but in a QB2 league, you have to play with somebody. So,
yeah, and I think the next tier for me starting, I have 2 at 17, which I think that's pretty fragile too. Like I'm pretty sure earlier today, I kind of just looked back at this, and it was Tannehill initially, so maybe Tua for the age, but ultimately like Derek Carr's right there at 19, and the other 2 rookies from last year, Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, Baker Mayfield. Basically takes us so almost to the end of the QB2 range there. So I think that next tier is
really, really interesting. In some of the leagues last year, like the Scott Fish Bowl, I read somewhere that you really only needed one quarterback to do great or do well, because the QB2 could be like a rotator, like you just said. Those 17 through 28 or whatever, basically the same. That a lot of times you can actually get more points from an extra wide receiver or running back that you don't think. You always think because you're in Superflex, you got to start 2 quarterbacks, but you don't. I went off last year. My quarterbacks were actually, my second quarterback was Desean Watson, so I didn't have a second quarterback. I just played an extra position player.
And I think, like, especially with the Scott Fish Bowl, that they've got the, it's 0.25, so a quarter point per completion, but a negative half point per incompletion. So like the problem with the quarterbacks is there really was no floor. If your quarterback played awful, you were scoring negative points that week. So, and I mean, negative points per sacks as well. So like some people played a quarterback and scored -9 sometimes if they were just like massive sack games.
Oh, exactly.
So in that format,
latter half of the season, it's like, I don't even need to start.
Yeah, exactly. Like in that format, it just sometimes made no sense to even play the second quarterback. So yeah, like that's a league where you could definitely see that. And I've kind of noticed that spring up a little more. The points per completion, the negative points per incompletion. I've seen that kind of sprinkled in a few more leagues. I know they've kind of done that in the Scott Fish Bowl over the last couple of seasons. So that's something that's kind of getting to be I guess as part of Superflex, right? Because we're saying it gets to a point where okay, well, at this point, just draft quarterbacks. Just get this. It doesn't matter who you have. Just get enough of these guys in this 17 to 30 range. But if you have those completion and negative incompletion points, and the negative points per sacks, then you're not as, those back end guys actually lose value, and suddenly it makes those top end guys more valuable. Although we're all talking like, your first round is half of them anyway, so it's have to get that much more. But maybe you'll see some guys in that second tier go into the first round. You might see in a redraft league a Jalen Hurts go into the first round. Even again, this is Dynasty show, so we didn't talk redraft too much. But so I think we did a really great job of not just covering these tiers, but also talk about how they affect our views of the draft strategies at both positions. Were there any other comments either you wanted to add dynasty wise about? You can even doesn't have to even be quarterback or tight end, but anything you want to get off your chests.
The only thing I want to mention is that we're kind of getting into the heart of the dynasty season. We had the combine this week. I believe it's March 16th for agency starts. So a lot of time for those drafts to be. If you're looking for more, always on Twitter, seems like there's always constantly something being mentioned. So if you're looking for new leagues, now's probably a good time to look at it.
Yeah, that's true.
It's officially the kickoff of trade season for everybody with the combine going on and free agency starting. So everyone's about to get flooded with trade offers and paragraph-long messages on why it's a good deal for you and why you should take it. So it's a good time of the year. I enjoy this part of the season, getting some deals done. I've already made a handful the last week or so. So it's a really exciting time for dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I got a couple trades done. One just a couple days ago, another one maybe about a week ago. So yeah, maybe that's something we touch on next episode, is just to go through a bunch of trades if you guys want. Because we really, we did this tier trio, but we really hadn't decided what the next episode's going to be about. We'll be back in 2 weeks though. That's here for sure. We'll always be back every 2 Thursdays. That'll be, we're March 3rd today, so that'll be quick math. That's the
March 17th.
We'll be able to recap some free agency news because I think 16th is the day where it actually kicks off. They can sign 14th, like legal tampering period. And then 16th at noon, I think, is when they could actually put some ink on
time
paper.
For us. I guess we celebrate St. Patrick's Day with everyone. So
there you go.
I think if memory serves me, 4 p.m. is when they can. Is that
I think you're right, actually.
With your current team?
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Whenever the league year resets, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's always like 4 p.m. It's weird. But yeah, I think it's 4 p.m. Eastern. So we'll at least have some. There'll already be people who've agreed,
Yeah. We'll get
Monday
news on the
Tuesday,
Tuesday, probably, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember when we signed Allen Robinson, it was like the first minute of free agency. He already agreed. And then I had to sweat for 2 days to be like, is he going to back out of the deal? You know what I mean? So we'll have some stuff to talk about.
Well, would he ever be unhappy in Chicago? No way.
And the interesting thing is they'll probably be gone after this trade deadline. So.
Oh yeah, I know.
Break all the news. Sorry. So I guess we've kind of planned our next episode already. We'll recap some free agency, and then I guess end with some dynasty trades that we've all done.
If anyone has any suggestions, can hit us all up.
And that's something we, any viewers, listeners who have any trades they want us to talk about as well, like that feel free. We'll post any trades. That's kind of maybe an open invitation, but certainly next episode we'll reach out to us on Twitter. Anyone watching the video, all our Twitter handles are on the screen. Devin's at Devin Deal. Brian's at Vandegrad 92. I'm at Senra Says. And of course, everything at Going for Two. There's 2 Twitter accounts really for Going for Two. The Going for Two Live, which is all of our podcast live streams. And anytime any of them go live, there'll be notifications for that. Anytime the podcast is reposted for the audio version, that'll all go on the Going for Two Live network. So at Going for Two Live. Of course, goingfor2.com, all the great articles for not just fantasy football. That's our focus here, but tons of great DFS content and fantasy content for other sports, basketball, hockey, eventually baseball, probably. We'll see. Maybe not. But that's not up to the powers that be. But so all that at goingfor2.com or on Twitter at goingfor_2. We'll be back again, like I said, in 2 weeks. St. Patrick's Day, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. So on behalf of Brian, Devin, did you guys have any final messages for the listeners and viewers?
No, just have a great week and weekend.
Yep, agreed. Enjoy the combine, and we'll talk to you after free agency.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, all listeners and viewers, for listening and tuning in to the Dynasty Gambit. Bye for now.